Picture 1838, Boston Harbor, the smell of salt water and timber and money. Wealthy shipping merchants sitting around a table, not talking about crime, talking about cost. Every week they paid armed guards out of their own pockets to stand watch over their cargo ships. Every week, a line in the ledger that didn't need to be there. And then, one of them said something that would permanently change the structure of American society. He said, "What if the public paid for this instead?" That was not a theory. That was not a suspicion. That is documented history, preserved in Boston's own municipal records, sitting in plain sight for nearly 2 centuries. And yet, almost nobody knows it. All because the version of this story most people learned in school left out the most important sentence. The first American police department was not built to protect citizens, it was built to protect profit. Today we are going to follow the full paper trail. We are going to name the men, name the dates, name the money, and show you how a financial decision made by a group of merchants in 1838 became the $237 billion institution that shapes every American neighborhood to this day. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will never see a police cruiser the same way again. For the first 200 years of American history, there were no police departments. None. No precincts, no patrol cars, no badges, no dispatch operators, no one to call. What existed instead was something inherited from medieval England called the Night Watch. Boston started one in 1636. New York followed in 1658. Philadelphia in 1700. The concept was almost embarrassingly simple. Volunteers, often reluctant ones, would walk the streets from sunset to sunrise. They carried a wooden rattle and a 6-foot pole painted blue and white. If they spotted a fire or heard a disturbance, they shook the rattle and shouted until nearby citizens came running to help. The watchman was not expected to stop anything himself. He was an alarm system with legs. In practice, the entire operation was a slow-motion disaster. Watchmen drank on duty, and they slept through their shifts. Some communities required the watchman to call out the hour aloud every single night, not to inform the public of the time, but to prove he was still conscious. Think about what that tells you about the quality of men they had keeping watch. But here is the detail that changes everything. In many American colonies, night watch duty was assigned as punishment. If you committed a petty offense, your sentence might be walking the streets at night pretending to protect your neighbors. The person guarding your block may have been there because he was caught stealing from someone else's. And if you were wealthy enough to be called for watch duty, you could pay a substitute to take your place. According to crime historian Gary Potter, those substitutes were frequently petty criminals and local thugs. And so the choice was simple. Your street was either watched by a convicted criminal serving a sentence or a hired criminal paid by someone rich enough to avoid doing it himself. That was American public safety for 2 full centuries. The constables who supervised the system were no better. They worked on a fee-per-warrant basis. Their income did not depend on preventing crime. It depended on processing it. The more arrests they made, the more warrants they served, the better their year. Nobody measured whether neighborhoods were safer. Nobody counted crimes that didn't happen. There was only one metric: crimes processed for payment. This was not public safety. This was a business, and nobody with enough money to matter was complaining because the wealthy had private security. The poor had the drunk watchman with the rattle. If this history is new to you, you are not alone. Hit subscribe right now so you never miss a video, and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. Let's see how far this one travels. While the northern colonies stumbled through their broken volunteer system, the American South was building something with far more structure, far more funding, and a far more explicit purpose. In 1704, the Carolina colonies established the first formal slave patrols. Groups of armed white men on horseback, authorized by colonial government, given a specific jurisdiction, a regular schedule, and a sworn mandate. Stop, search, and brutalize any enslaved person found traveling without written permission from their enslaver. Virginia followed in the 1727. North Carolina in 1753. By the end of the 18th century, every slaveholding state had one. The Patrol Oath, the earliest known sworn statement of American law enforcement, required men to swear they would search for guns, swords, and other weapons among enslaved people. Read that slowly. The first sworn law enforcement oath in American history was not a promise to protect citizens. It was a promise to search for weapons among people being held against their will. That is not ancient history. That is the founding document of American policing. These were not informal mobs. By 1837, the Charleston Slave Patrol had over 100 officers, making it the largest organized law enforcement force in the entire country. Larger than any northern city's night watch. Larger than any constable system. The first professional policing apparatus ever built on American soil was not designed to stop crime. It was designed to stop freedom. Historians of race and law enforcement have documented this connection extensively. The organizational structure, the patrol zones, the use of informants, with a culture of unaccountable violence, all of it carried forward, not reformed, absorbed. When slavery ended legally in 1865, the slave patrols did not simply vanish. They reorganized. They were rebranded. They found new mandates under new laws. The infrastructure remained. Only the language changed. Now we arrive at 1838 and the transaction that rewrote American history. Boston was one of the largest and most profitable shipping centers on the continent. The city's merchant class had been spending their own money on private guards to protect cargo at the port and along trade routes connecting the docks to warehouses. It was a necessary cost. It was also a significant one. And then someone realized the math could work very differently. If protecting commercial goods could be reframed as a matter of collective public safety, if the security of private cargo could be described as a civic responsibility, then the cost would shift from merchant ledgers to taxpayer rolls. The city created the day police, 6 officers working under the city marshal, the first publicly funded police force in American history. It was not created by a vote of ordinary citizens demanding protection. It was created by commercial interests who found a way to make everyone else pay their security bill. The full Boston Police Department followed in 1854. 250 officers paid $2 per shift with a primary mandate of maintaining order, which in practice meant protecting commercial property and managing the populations that threatened it. New York followed in 1845. The state legislature authorized up to 800 officers. And what happened next is something that almost no American history textbook has ever told you. The officers refused to wear uniforms, not quietly and privately. They organized a public rally that drew 1,500 people. Officers stood before the crowd and declared the proposed uniform a badge of servility. They said being forced to identify themselves as police would bury popular freedom. Some were dismissed for refusing to comply. They appealed to the courts. It took 8 years of bitter, high-profile public debate before New York finally adopted uniforms in 1853. The first outfit, a leather helmet, a blue frock coat buttoned to the neck, gray trousers with a black stripe. 20 years after that, in 1874, officers still reported that wearing the uniform drew insulting remarks from people on the street. These were men hired to keep order. They carried 14-inch clubs, and they did not want anyone to know they were police. The public did not want to know either. Both sides distrusted the institution from its very first day, and there was no training. None. Officers were appointed for 1 or 2 year terms, nominated by the ward boss of whatever political district they lived in. If the right man liked you, you got a badge. If he didn't, you were gone. By the 1870s, New York's Tammany Hall political machine controlled nearly every appointment in the police department. Positions were bought and sold openly, sometimes at published rates, like a price list for public office. The police did not serve the public. They served whoever had enough political leverage to put them on the street. What happened in 1857 is one of the most extraordinary and least told stories in American political history. 12 years after New York created its police force, the city had 2 of them. Mayor Fernando Wood controlled the municipal police, a force loyal to his Democratic political machine. The Republican-controlled state legislature responded by creating an entirely separate metropolitan police force to replace Wood's officers. Wood refused to disband. On June 16, 1857, the 2 police forces physically attacked each other on the steps of City Hall. Officers in identical blue uniforms fought officers in identical blue uniforms. Neither side was certain which force held legal authority. Contemporary accounts describe 5 points criminals dancing in the streets while the brawl unfolded. Arrests made by one force were immediately overturned by the other. Suspects captured by municipal officers were walked free by metropolitan ones. The concept of law and order had collapsed entirely into farce. The state had to call in the National Guard. The State Court of Appeals eventually ruled the Metropolitan Police legitimate. It took 12 years for American policing to descend into a physical war with itself. Follow the money a decade further, and the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. By the 1880s, NYPD Superintendent Thomas Burns had accumulated personal wealth of $350,000, roughly $9.6 million in today's dollars. Where did a police superintendent get that kind of money? From investments made on his behalf by Cornelius Vanderbilt and Jay Gould, two of the most powerful financiers in American history, who were personally enriching the head of the city's police force. In exchange, historians document that the NYPD provided what they call the ruthless suppression of unions and political dissent. The city's bankers, developers, and industrialists tolerated police corruption because the police were keeping organized labor in its place. Taxpayers funded the force. The wealthy directed it. The superintendent pocketed the gratitude. That triangle is not an aberration in the history of American policing. It is the blueprint. And it scaled immediately. By the 1880s, every major American city had a police department, all publicly funded, all modeled on the same basic structure, all answering not to voters, but to political machines and the commercial interest behind them. The expansion was driven not only by rising urban crime, but by one specific economic anxiety. Immigrants were organizing. Irish, Italian, German, and Eastern European workers arriving through Ellis Island were forming unions, staging strikes, and demanding wages that cut into profit margins. The people who owned the factories, the docks, the railroads, and the tenements needed a publicly funded mechanism to keep those workers working. So crime historian Gary Potter documents this connection directly. Fears of labor organizers and immigrant populations drove the explosive expansion of police forces across every major American city in the final decades of the 19th century. Here is the part that should stop you cold. Everything we have described, the merchant funding, the political control, the labor suppression, the financial corruption, all of it happened before 1900. The institutions that grew from those foundations are the institutions that still exist today. The badges look different. Training programs now exist, at least in theory. The explicit legal structures have been reformed repeatedly, but the financial architecture underneath has never been redesigned. Not once. Not from the ground up. Total government spending on policing in the United States reached $237.7 billion in 2024. The NYPD's budget alone exceeds $5.4 billion annually. In most American cities, policing is the single largest line item in the general fund, consuming between 40 and 60 cents of every dollar the city spends. And every one of those dollars comes from ordinary taxpayers, and the system those dollars fund was engineered from its very first hour to serve the interests of the people who were already powerful. Now here is what I want to be precise about. The argument is not that public safety is unimportant. It is not that every individual police officer is corrupt, or that no good has ever been done wearing the badge. Those are easy dismissals that sidestep the harder question entirely. The harder question is structural. Can an institution that was engineered from its birth to serve commercial interests, that was controlled from its first decade by political machines, and corrupted from its first generation by financial elites, can such an institution be structurally capable of serving the public it was never designed to protect? In the Night Watchman were drunks and convicted criminals. The slave patrols were state-sponsored terror for hire. The first police departments were merchant-funded, politically operated patronage systems. Each phase was not reformed. It was absorbed, expanded, and renamed. The Boston Police Department's own official website describes this history. The dates are there. The Night Watch is mentioned. The day police of 1838 are there. The information is publicly available on a government website with no warning label and no dramatic revelation. There is no cover-up. There is no conspiracy of silence requiring secret documents or whistleblowers. There is just a version of the story with the financial motivation quietly edited out, and are told so flatly and so often that nobody thinks to ask the obvious question: who benefited from arranging things this way? You learn about the Boston Tea Party in school. You learn the dates of the Constitutional Convention. You do not learn that the first police officers in American history were merchant-funded guards who refused to be identified, served at the pleasure of political bosses, and whose primary function was protecting commercial property, not people. That omission is not accidental. It is structural. History is not only what is recorded, it is also what gets left out of the curriculum. The merchants are gone. The slave patrols lost their legal authority in 1865. The wooden rattles went silent a long time ago. But the bills never stopped coming. They just got bigger. And the line between who pays and who benefits, drawn in 1838 in a Boston counting house by men calculating how to shift their costs onto the public, has never been fully redrawn. $237 billion every year. Same architecture, same question. If the people who built this system did not build it for you, then who was it built for? And if it is still running on the same financial blueprint 2 centuries later, is it possible the answer has not changed?